I'm Declan McCabe from St. Michael's College. I'm part of the biology department and the Centre for the Environment. St. Michael's College has devoted two-thirds of its campus to a natural area, much of which is in a wetland reserve easement, and our students are learning from that process and using those areas to monitor, so far, 19 different mammal species, from bobcats to flying squirrels. I'm thrilled to introduce Sue Morse. Sue has had a long association with St. Michael's College and has participated in many of our courses over the years. She is the founder of Keeping Track Vermont, founded in 1994. She's a professional tracker, and she brings a very rigorous scientific approach to wildlife monitoring. She's very much interested in the relationship between habitats and wildlife, and she really is a naturalist and ecologist who happens to do a lot of excellent work studying mammals. And so I have to do one piece of housekeeping, which is simply to say that questions should be entered into the Q&A as the talk proceeds, and we will attempt to answer as many as possible at the end, and I will integrate several questions together. Tell us who you are, where you're from, ask your question. The chat has been disabled, and we are using Q&A for that purpose. And without further ado, I give you Sue Morse.
Well, I am very honored to be here at St. Mike's with Dr. McCabe and his associates, both from the media department and from the biology department. And I'm just deeply moved and grateful to have been invited to give this program on behalf of the Lewis Creek Association and Vermont Family Forests and the Watershed Center. And this program has been prepared by Keeping Track, and as you see here, these are our participants and, of course, our wonderful host here at the college. Isn't that boy wonderful? What's better than a green frog on a wet, rainy day, huh? And we are real grateful at Keeping Track for our various donors who've made tonight's program possible. So everybody, join me in thanking them. And bear hugs to these folks who've helped with various technical aspects of my producing these shows, especially since I don't use a computer at all. So you can imagine I'm starting from ground zero. I take the pictures, but it's these folks who help me make these shows happen. And more bear hugs in particular, as I said, to David Bryn, Sandra Murphy, Glenda McKinnon, and Myra Handy, whom I know about. Obviously, there are others representing these various organizations who made tonight possible. And of course, the Center for the Environment here at St. Michael's College is a real showpiece. So if you have a youngster looking to go to school, stay right here in Vermont. Come to St. Mike's. The photography is my own, and while I'm really talking about wildness tonight and not wilderness per se, occasionally we'll go back and forth between the two, because I do believe there are some vitally needed opportunities out there that we should seize upon to secure more wilderness for the state. Thoreau had the phrase that many of us, frankly, misunderstood all through the 70s. "In wildness is the preservation of the world." Great, we all thought, environmental advocates of the time. It turns out he was really thinking more with his transcendentalist mind of the fact that wildness was somehow the mirror for the human mind. In fact, he said as much, that nature is the metaphor for the human mind. That's not exactly what we all thought he meant. Well, he was very prophetic, very ahead of his time in a lot of ways, and his vision certainly touches us today because, indeed, in wildness is the preservation of the world. And we'll get at that in various ways today. Much later, someone of my career, if you will, I knew this man, I hiked with him, David Brower, former director of Sierra Club and then founder of Friends of the Earth, he said, "I believe in the rights of creatures other than man." So that represented a real change in our thinking about what wildness was about and why that was important. Wild habitats and wild beings offer us the opportunity to experience and cherish those rights, to get out of ourselves. We are not transcending anything. We are just plain focusing on the reality of these creatures and what they need to survive, their freedom, their habitat, all the above. Sociologist and environmental philosopher Bill DeVal, who wrote The Rights of Nature, and incidentally, after the YouTube production comes out, we will be providing all registrants with a bibliography that I'm in the process of creating for you, where all these books will be listed. And he believed that the existence of wilderness is a manifestation of restraint on the part of the planet's dominant life form. Wilderness is the habitat of other beings which have the right to live and blossom for themselves. Humans should understand wilderness areas are not settings for outdoor recreation, but gestures of planetary modesty, expressions of respect and reverence for the intrinsic value of nature. Seen in this way, wilderness preservation demonstrates a human commitment to share the environment with the present and future generations, I love this, of all creatures, rocks, and trees. Wow, pretty special. And again, we're going back and forth between wilderness and wildness here, but despite all of our pretenses and fantasies, we always have been and will remain a biological species tied to this particular biological world. Millions of years of evolution are indelibly encoded in our genes. History without the wildlands is no history at all. And this is certainly from one of my favorite scientists in the whole wide world, Dr. E.O. Wilson, Edward O. Wilson. And if you haven't read Half Earth, you must, because he believes that we need to save half of the planet now, immediately. Yesterday would have been better, in order to save the fabric of biodiversity. I'm a tree hugger. There it is. Full confession, I'm a tree hugger. And I grew up in Pennsylvania where we had tulip poplars like this. Yellow poplars, they're called. Really a member of the magnolia family. This is what I loved. These trees spoke to me and still do. But you know, it didn't stop there in Pennsylvania in the 50s and 60s. Now, more recently, in the last 15 years, I've spent a lot of time in some of the wildest habitat in North America, the Arctic and the boreal forest. And I'm learning, and I'll do this all evening, I'm learning that part of the importance of wildness in our lives, in our gardens, in our backyards, along our streams, along Lewis Creek, at the Watershed Center, part of the importance of wildness is we can learn to love all kinds of things. Unabashed love affairs. I have a love affair with caribou. There it is. I can't help myself. I have a love affair of where they live. And because of that, I'm a better defender, if you will, of their rights for being and existence and sustenance in their habitat. Again, some of the wildest habitats in North America. These are my credentials in recent years, but make no mistake, these places in my heart are no more special than what's right here in the Champlain Basin. It's all related. These polar bears are related to black bears, even though they're worlds apart in terms of what they do and where they live. And I love them for that. And they're very imperiled. And I'm not going to get political here tonight too much, but I'm going to beg you all to Google the Willow Project and understand that President Biden has just authorized that huge oil and gas project on the Alaskan North Slope. Even though we all have expressed our sincere concerns about that, hundreds of miles of roads, 280 billion megatons or whatever of carbon. It's a nightmare, and we've got to stop it. Or these polar bears are at risk. Now, I didn't take this picture along Lewis Creek. That's a polar bear track. But it's no less wild than the black bears we see here at home. It lives in a wilder place, for sure, but its needs are no less significant. Wildness gives us an excuse to have a love affair with the wolverine. My colleagues know that I love wolverines, and in recent years, I've just gone head over heels and crazy about them. And this picture I call Kissable Mr. Wolverine. There you go. Some of the wildest animals in North America I have seen and photographed. But that doesn't make them any more special than the wolves that are now beginning, tentatively, to show up here at home, in Maine and possibly the Adirondacks, the eastern Canadian timber wolf. Hats off to resilience, to adaptability, to species that can make a go of it in spite of what we're doing out there. And hats off to the new coyote that came about as a result of hybridization between the Midwestern coyote and the wolf we saw up there in Canada, the eastern Canadian timber wolf up in Algonquin Park. Our coyote is not a coy wolf. It's a new coyote. Hooray! Wildness gives us the excuse to smile when the coyotes smile. Gives us the excuse to feel the same joy they feel on a sunny morning when it's 22 below zero. Wildness gives us an excuse to appreciate that they're parents too. And like us, they want to do their best by their children. This father is getting ready to provide the hot lunch program to its pup. He's going to regurgitate, and out it'll come, and that pup will love that. Oh, I wasn't fast enough to get what actually came out, but I think you can appreciate that pup's not exactly sure what the heck he's supposed to do with that. So wildness should be part of our education. It should be part of our increasing humility and our willingness to practice Aldo Leopold's land ethic. Wildness is part of recognizing that salmon worldwide are not going to be doing well in a climate-changing world. As a consequence, all of those animals that depend on salmon, including ourselves, will find it to be a very hard situation. This is a brown bear up in Katmai. Here she is snorkeling. I call a down periscope. Imagine being a salmon and swimming by that. But she's no more wild and special than this bear on my property in Jericho, which I've conserved with the Northeast Wilderness Trust. This property will never have any trees cut on it, period, forever. I love that. I love that opportunity. Look them up on the web and see what you can learn. Great organization. By the way, that bear's nervous. You see her hackles are up? She's not sure what I'm about. These animals are in a precarious situation. You know, in the 50 years that I've been studying wildlife, 70% of the world's mammals have declined. Think about it. But we're lucky here in the Champlain Basin and adjoining foothills. I'm thinking of places like the hogbacks, the little hogbacks even, above Starksboro on the east side. All that Lewis Creek watershed tumbling down into the valleys. Great places for bears to be. Lots of food. This bear's checking out some scent marks from another bear, I think. Their sense of smell is uncanny. Wrap your nose around that. I studied cougars for over 20 years out west in some of the wildest habitats in the lower 48. And I love them. That's wildness for you. Doesn't get any wilder than that. But it does. The habitat is what makes that cougar what it is. And without it, that cougar, puma, panther, catamount, call them what you will, they would not exist. So it's up to us to conserve that habitat now aggressively while we can. It turns out they perform incredibly important roles. Predation pressure on herbivores causes them to be fearful in some habitats and less so in others. By altering herbivore feeding habits, portions of the forest are avoided and browsing pressure is minimized. That is the bullseye. These selected areas in a landscape of fear become refugia for the natural diversity and abundance of native plants and the animals they support. This is from my book, which is out of print now, but it'll be coming back on into availability next fall. Again, they're nowhere without their habitats. And for mother cougars or any animal, wolverine, you take your pick, caribou, they're nowhere without safe places for their offspring. We don't talk about that enough. This wasn't a safe place. This poor cat, everybody loved him in Los Angeles. He really was an icon in the area. That's the Hollywood sign. This was taken by a remote camera by a National Geographic photographer, Steve Winter. He's since then had to be euthanized because he finally was hit by a car, inevitably, and couldn't hunt anymore. People mourned his passing. The good news is, California is committed now to building a huge wildlife underpass in that very area. Maybe that will avoid some of this stuff in the future. Cryptic cats. They're my specialty, you might say. They like cover. They like secret places. But you know what? There wasn't enough cover here, and this cat just didn't make it. And so even here in Vermont, which we like to think is pristine and safe, not at all like Los Angeles, the mortality is huge, daily, weekly, monthly, annually. And cats starve. All these animals starve. If they have the misfortune of being in a habitat that is not supportive enough, not diverse enough, not with enough prey, too curtailed by us and our activities, our trails, our recreation, whatever, it's not good for them. It's stressful, and it's a killer. These cats are happier. They're in a refugia. They're in a sanctuary, functionally. Yeah, there are mortality factors out there they need to worry about, but they don't need to worry about our cars. They don't need to worry about their kittens being harassed by us and our traffic. This is a view from my study area in the uplands, part of the whole area that we're thinking about in tonight's program, what I call the Champlain Basin and adjoining foothills, leading right up to our highest summits, Mount Mansfield, Camel's Hump, that's what we're looking at there to the south. This is all conserved now. And I will say this, it takes citizens to pull that off. We did it. A handful of us started this project called the Chittenden County Uplands Project, and we're now looking at 10,000 acres that have been conserved. And all sorts of organizations joined and helped and provided critical support. The Land Trust, the Nature Conservancy, the Green Mountain Club, to name just a few. So remember that. If you despair of what's happening in your backyard, don't be a NIMBY and try and fight it one at a time. Join with your neighbors and make a cause. From the mountains in the Adirondacks to the mountains in Vermont, the Champlain Basin is critical. It's a link. It's a movement, assemblage, if you will, of habitats, of corridors, of core habitats, large and small alike, that still work for wildlife. A moose can still make that journey. So far. You know, we need to get more involved in the process of thinking about our forests, thinking about how they should be stewarded, thinking about our wildlife, and thinking about how they should be cared for. And to that end, I agree with David Brin, who wrote an article in Vermont Digger in February, when he said we need more citizens to be part of the boards that have influence over these decisions. So remember that. That might be one of the most valuable things you can do, is to figure out how you can serve on one of those boards and let your voices be heard. You know, these animals, they don't benefit from our help if we don't give it. We love them, but love is not enough. Wildness stimulates us to do more. Wildness stimulates us to get the kids outside. For heaven's sakes, leave the devices at home. No cell phones allowed, no smartphones, none of that. Let's go see where the moose took its teeth and scraped upwards on that red maple tree. That's exciting. Let's join these students who come as part of the Green Across the World program, bringing students from China and Japan to Vermont to learn about natural resources and learn about the natural economy of nature and how we can make that get along with our human economy and not be in terrible conflict. Those are moose hairs, by the way. Another favorite project of mine, and you should Google this because they're just now going to be publishing a new report that they've written. It'll be out soon now. The Wildlands, Woodlands, Farmlands, and Communities Initiative calls for at least 70% of New England to be protected forest, wildlands to occupy at least 10% of the region, and all existing farmland to be permanently conserved. When I first heard them talking about this in the early 2000s, I was floored. I just couldn't believe my ears. I thought, this is it, finally. We have a consensus of the best leaders in forest science and environmental protection in New England convening to think about our future. And this is what they came up with. So logging isn't the enemy, doesn't need to be. Logging just needs to be done really well, but logging also needs to be done in balance with wildlands, with water protection, with wildlife. Our rural areas, our farms are part of the wildlands. They wouldn't exist without them. This red fox knows all about the wild foods that can be had at the edge of the farmer's field. Notice the tail in that red fox's mouth. I have yet to get this. I keep trying for that quintessential pouncing picture, but there it is. What do you see? Breakfast, I think. These animals, I remember when I just plain didn't see them, but in the Champlain Basin, they were here more and more as time went on, gray foxes. I took this picture in Charlotte. Wonderful creatures, not at all related to red foxes. They're wild. They're wild, and they inspire me to think wild thoughts about how I can manage my woods so as to make sure the qualities of habitat they need are there for them. Check with the Vermont Family Forest website and look up their checklist of organic forestry suggestions. This is one of them. Coarse woody debris. We need it. That fox definitely needs it for a den site. This is the Lewis Creek in the background. It doesn't get any wilder than that. I just love the thought of it. And I love the thought of the organization that formed itself, devotes itself even today to protecting it, protecting the whole watershed for the benefit of us all and, of course, wildlife and plants. This is Linda Hamilton of the Lewis Creek Association, and that's the La Platte. And this was one of many classes that we did for the Lewis Creek Association to get well over 100 people excited about wildlife and wildlife monitoring. Those are otter slides. Oh boy, we've got to watch this. And Lewis Creek is very, very vigilant about this. We've got to watch invasives, both in the water and beside our waterways. That's Japanese knotweed, and that is a disaster. We've got to do something about it. And it takes organizations and the many volunteers that work with them to do this work. It's not easy. But the otters certainly appreciate anything we can do to keep their habitat whole and diverse. Great swimmers, you can see why. Mink, the same. This is a buck mink. And remember this, if you see a mink and it has a skinny little neck, svelte, shiny, pretty, glittery-eyed, it's a female. If you see a mink and it has a Sylvester Stallone neck, that's a male, otherwise known as a buck mink. Beavers. They're a real keystone. And across all of our waterways throughout the Champlain Basin, Otter Creek to the north, all the way to the Winooski River, the beaver is very much at home and making it happen for dozens of species of birds and mammals and insects. What are the chances of seeing something like that? Notice how the one in the center is using the other one's tail as a prop. See it? Wow. This is a keeping track class. So over the years, we've been thrilled to partner with all of these organizations, and certainly with St. Mike's too, to learn about wildlife, to learn about monitoring wildlife, and most importantly, to learn about wildlife conservation. This young man was new to America, from Africa. He wasn't especially welcomed by his classmates. They were cold, and he was clearly lonely on our field trip. But the minute he hit the woods, he knew what to do, and he shined. And I swear to you, within an hour, he was the star of the class. And the girls especially noticed him. I'm telling you, it was incredible. Now, what is he doing now? Well, he's sniffing a castor mound. Why? Because I asked him to. This is not the Al Capone of the animal kingdom. And so a lot of animals out there in our area, the Champlain Basin, are maligned because people think they're mean and evil and vicious and killing every house cat that ever lived and on. And it's just not true. They're very inquisitive, and I've done wildlife rehab for the state back when I had more time, and I've raised 2 fishers from, tiny little ones, and I've never met an animal that was as bright as they are. I often say they're going to go to school and get 2 degrees with honors, probably go to Yale. They're eaters of carrion out there, and so I think a lot of times people are out in the woods and they find fisher tracks around a dead deer and they assume that the fisher killed the deer. Well, repeat after me. A cat can have kittens in the oven, but that doesn't make them biscuits. We love our deer, and that's Pete Obie of the Lewis Creek Association out with some of our class members learning about deer sign in the woods. This would be November. It's exciting knowing that they're out there, bucks and does alike. And of course, our young hunters learning about hunting and how to care for wildlife and how to be stewards of wildlife. They're just as excited as anybody. Buck's not so excited about the hunters. The doe isn't either. But that's what makes the world goes around. And in our region, too many deer, I'm sorry to say, are bad for their own environment, not to mention ours. Too many deer out in the woods, for example, eating all the spring wildflowers is a disaster in some places. You can go to some parts of the Champlain Basin and not see spring wildflowers and not see certain species of trees and shrubs because they're eaten by the deer. A research project in Connecticut found that they germinated deer pellets collected in the wild, and they grew 57 species of plant, 32 of which were invasive species. So that takes up the room that our native species, like this red oak, might prefer to have. So there's a relationship between too many deer, invasive species, and the loss of diversity in our plants. Same thing with moose. Too many moose overwhelms the preferred browse species that they prefer to eat, and next thing you know, along comes a problem like winter tick, and the combination of not enough good food and the parasite really is very hard, as we all know. Deer ticks. Again, too many deer, too many invasive species that are associated with the deer, and all of a sudden you've got more ticks than you remember. We're going to shift a little bit to the wildness of my early years doing this work in the 70s. This is my study area, and when I first moved here, this was a young woods. You know, you had occasional witness trees, occasional boundary trees, but basically the trees were all, between 30 and 45 years old. I loved it. I do love young forest habitat and early successional habitat. This is one of the many reasons why I love some of the farm edge habitats we see in the Champlain Basin. I just get a charge out of them. They're wildness of a different sort. And our state's conservation reserve design has identified the need for a certain amount of this kind of habitat in the state strategically. And I get that. Ask the bobcat what it thinks. It likes those young forests that support young wild. Well, I'm out of order here. We'll get back to that. The snowshoe hares, for example, and the ruffed grouse. The bobcat was all about that. But the other thing I like about these habitats, these young forest habitats and these old reverting heifer pastures, as we call them, is there's often a lot of apple trees there, wild apples and serviceberries and hawthorns. And they're just stunningly beautiful, especially now. But they're also much loved by wildlife. Bears, as you can see here. That's John Coyer of the Jericho Underhill Land Trust. And I was one of the 2 foresters that advised the Land Trust on management of those trees and releasing their crown space so that they could flourish. And where they flourish, the bears flourish. That's quite a lot of serviceberries, do you think? All these plants, these shrubs that people tend to overlook, these are critically important. Did you think for 1 minute that the interior forest songbirds in our big aging woods, that's all they need? No. They come to the edge of our woods and they hit all of this food before, where they bulk up, if you will, on these fruits before migrating south. Deliberately. You'll see all those birds right here on the edge eating viburnum species and dogwood species, for example, just to name 2. There you go. And then, of course, the mature trees that are in our maturing woods, they're really important, too. And I get excited about the wildness in a picture like this because, well, I learned doing careful monitoring over 40-something years that the number one kind of plant that provides food for all sorts of animals, foxes, fishers, bears, is, guess what? Cherry species. Pin cherry, choke cherry, black cherry. Not beech. Beech is really important and gets a lot of press. but remember the cherries. Do what you can to help them. If you have grapes growing all over your bully pines on the edge of your pasture by your farm, leave them alone. Let them make bushels of food for wildlife. They're really just giant arbors. Now, this is what's happening in my study area now. Now, this is what happens after the passage of almost 47 years. The woods is different. A lot of blowdowns, tip-overs, what we call gap formation, a lot of woody debris accumulating on the forest floor, a lot of openings, forest openings, gaps as we call them. This is exciting because every one of these openings that gets created over time are like spotlights of sun shining on the forest floor, stimulating greater plant diversity and greater age class diversity of plants, and, oh, by the way, greater feeding opportunities for wildlife. This is amazing. Look on the left-hand side of this picture. Those rocks were piled. We're looking at what was a foundation for a farmstead. This is what it looks like today. Doesn't get any wilder than that. And of course, with all the openings come the plants that like that sunshine, and all the people and the animals and the insects that love the fruit of those plants. Now, this'll surprise you. I had to get down flat on my stomach to take this picture. Doesn't look like much from when you're standing up, but boy, you get below it. This is wild strawberry. Guess who likes wild strawberry? Wood turtles. I rehabilitated this turtle. It was injured, and I just kept her for a couple of days before releasing her back where she was found. But she loved the strawberries. I just put her down on the ground, followed her around, sort of like what Ben Killam does with bears. I was amazed at what she wanted to eat. And every time she came upon a wild strawberry, she ate it. Wildness gives us an excuse to just stop. We're not working anymore. We're quitting. And just admire the beauty that's out there, even in our farm pastures. This is a hawthorn. It doesn't get any better than that. These are hawthorn flowers. Oh, pretty spiny. A lot of people don't like hawthorns because of these spines. They're difficult. Well, there's a wonderful book, which will be in your bibliography, called Hawthorn by Bill Vaughan. And boy, he tried to eradicate the hawthorns on his ranch in Montana. And the more he tried to cut into those trees without completely maiming himself, the worse it got, and he did eventually get hurt. And he was furious. He said, "What the hell was this thing? Some sort of mutant? Like the berserk outer space plants that ludicrous science fiction movie I loved as a kid called Day of the Triffids?" Well, whatever you are, enjoy yourself while you can, I thought. Plotting revenge. I will burn you out. I will poison you. I will loop a chain around your body and yank you from the ground with my pickup. I lugged my chainsaw back to the shop. Then I grabbed a couple unread field guides from my office and headed back to the pasture. Know your enemy, I thought. Yet, after reading for an hour, I began to see the tree not as a monster or as an adversary, but as something more like a famous relative the family forgot to mention. A month later, after immersing myself in the vast lore of this tree, I felt as though I walked into my garden and discovered the world. So wildness gives us the opportunity to, gee whiz, get rid of that anger, get rid of those destructive impulses, and fall in love with hawthorns, with anything. Now, the deer like them well enough. They don't mind the spines. This buck, I just happened to get to see this. He's getting rid of the velvet. He's using the spines of the hawthorn to do it. This was on my pasture. And look here. There's a rough grouse sitting in a hawthorn tree in an abandoned field, old heifer pasture. And, boy, loving those hawthorns. Why not? And, of course, the bears really love them. Wildness all around us, large and small alike, gives us the excuse to just take a look and absorb and see. I'm kind of nuts about seeds. I've written about them in recent years. How does it all work for plants? What about seeds? Wow, that's wildness, isn't it? That's a double whammy. So get out of the car. That's the best advice I have. Go for a walk. These are viburnums in, well, definitely near Otter Creek. That much I'll tell you. I was on a field trip there. This is American hornbeam, different than American hazelnut, different than beaked hazelnut. Beautiful, though. Now, that's wild. That's an acorn. This is what we need. We need this because this is going to slow us down and hope to temper our anger, our frustrations. There's no better excuse to just go out there and fall in love with what the squirrels are doing. Take the afternoon off. Squirrels are cutting cache as many as 10,000 of these cones in a season and cache them and hope to have enough to eat all winter, which sounds like a plan. Whoa. They're very aware of you after a while. What is she doing? And this is what happens. They'll take those cones when they're going to eat something. They'll sit on top of something so they can elevate themselves and look around and be aware of potential enemies while they dine. But notice how that little spruce tree is growing in the moss of that stump. That's how the world works. This is from my book, and it's now, that is a huge old log in a wilderness area, forever protected, and that's Brett Engstrom, a well-known Vermont ecologist. In Wild Earth magazine, Eliza Parhad teaches us about the magic of nurse logs and stumps. She reveals that while living trees are made up of about 5% living tissues, so-called dead trees boast as much as 5 times more living matter than when they were growing upright. And the we here in this second paragraph is my grandfather and myself. We investigated another giant hemlock that had long ago died and fallen. Its log was carpeted with mosses, lichens, tree seedlings, and other plants. Within countless secret recesses, we discovered fungi, liverworts, insects, spiders, arthropods, eggs, pupae, and amphibians. The long expired tree trunk was full of life. And indeed, this is just one branch stub of that hemlock, or one like it. And that's a hemlock seedling coming along. One thing about what we see down here in the Champlain Basin, south of Shelburne especially, and into the clay plain forests, we see, and even east rather to Willowa, we see bur oak. And you can always tell bur oak with that wonderful textured, ridged quality on the branches. It's a beautiful tree, and the deer and all the animals that love acorns really love this tree. And they know about where it is. And oftentimes in the understory of these bur oaks and other large oaks down there, the white oaks and so on, are these trees. These are understory trees, the musclewood, as we call it, or American hornbeam. I had a student with me one day, and I said, I need a model. Who can help me out here? And he said, well, what do you want? I said, well, I need you to show me your really strong arm, your forearm especially. Well, he was thrilled when we did this. That's what musclewood is all about. White oaks. Big white oaks. We need to save old forests. We need to do what we can to allow today's young forests to become permanently protected old forests. That's what we need to do, really. Of the world's birds, some 11,000 known species, 1 of every 8 is endangered. That's a horrible statistic of my recent time on this planet, and I am ashamed and grieving. All kinds of birds that were common when I was young are not so common today, especially the grassland species, the meadowlark, the bobolink, for example, the aerial insectivores, if you will, the swifts, and it's just horrible. Species that depend on young forests and fields are disappearing in some places. It's thought that certainly our use of insecticides in more and more heavily treated industrial agriculture is the culprit, and I agree with that. And it's just a nightmare. And I don't know what we need to do in this great country of ours to persuade our leaders to listen and change our ways. We love our birds, but how many people are really to take a stand and share their thoughts with their elected officials? I think if we all did that, it would be a different world today. The good news is that many waterfowl species along our shores and so on are doing better. This one not so much, but collaborative efforts on the part of conservation groups and hunting organizations has really made those birds somewhat better off. I love these woodcocks. What can we do to keep them with us on this planet? Well, I wouldn't be me if I didn't wind this show up with some discussion of bobcats. I love them. But I have seen them in all places in the area that we're thinking about today. In the Green Mountain foothills, certainly where I live, all the way down to the lake. And I will say this, and you can quote me on this one. I believe that we have more bobcats here in this area than any place in the state of Vermont because of the diversity of habitats, of habitat types, of age classes of habitat, even including our farm and farm edge habitat. Think about it. From the top of Mount Mansfield all the way to the lake. From Camel's Hump all the way down into Addison County. That's what I'm talking about. It's incredible. They need security. They need freedom from harassment. They need not to be chased. They need not to have their birthing habitats pressured by us, stressed by us, and by our recreation. They need diversity. They love the wetlands. Make no mistake about it. I have found sign multiple times of bobcats hunting beavers and muskrats. They're not afraid of water. When I first moved to my study area, it was all about a young woods with lots of grouse and lots of snowshoe hare. But then, as the woods matured and acorns were available on the south-southwest facing dry slopes, suddenly, almost overnight, we had gray squirrels and turkeys, and guess what? Bobcats loved them. They love turkeys. Why not? More recently, I'm astonished by this. We have cottontails. We never had cottontails where I live, in the foothills of the Green Mountains. But in the open fields and farms, in the open habitats, we do all of a sudden. And guess what? The bobcats have figured that out. I found the remains of a dead cottontail not long ago on my farm. Monitoring is something we're excited about, and that's one of the things I love about all the organizations that are hosting tonight's event, including St. Michael's College. We're all about a scientific approach to collecting information about wildlife and using that information to move our conservation cause forward. These are remote camera pictures of bobcats in my study area scent marking. But watch. You can build what we call a photo fingerprint of your animals in some cases, especially the ones that have spots and stripes, and you can begin to know who the animals are. This is mystery. I have remote camera pictures of him that go back 11 years. This is a disaster. This is an insect apocalypse. We don't always see what's going on, and if we look closely at the wildness and beauty that's out there, we're more apt to pay attention and really slow down and change. But a lot of people don't do that. You know, this bumblebee may visit 3,000 flowers in a day. So when you talk about pollination, the scale of it is just huge. But this is where I was going a minute ago. This is the way it was when we were kids, remember? You couldn't take a trip anywhere without this all over your windshields and your grills. The cumulative effects of this over decades of time has got to be one of the major reasons why we're in the pickle we're in today. That and pesticides would be my two hunches. But we can do things. We can, around ourselves, around our farms, around our beautiful habitats, along our rivers and streams, where we're influencing anything, we can make sure the plant community is diverse and native and abundant. That's all. Willows are key. Milkweeds are just phenomenal. Now, build and they will come. Well, in this case, plant and they will come. I planted a pollinator garden at my property, and 1 year later, my swamp milkweed had this happening. 8 species of pollinators and other insects associated with that plant, including the monarch butterfly caterpillar, because milkweed is a host plant. Amazing. But then this is what really floors me. The very next year, we have species that really zero in on milkweed. How they even found it on my property, I don't know. In my area, I'm not aware of another swamp milkweed for miles. The milkweed leaf beetle, the oleander aphid, both are associated with milkweeds. Just extraordinary. So plants are key, and we need to encourage them. And I love the work that all of our organizations are doing to educate people about the importance of plants, native plants, and insects. Wildness is an excuse to get to know neighbors you didn't know you had, to get to love them. Look at the eggs in the midsection of that millipede. Dr. McCabe has said this. He and his students have monitored the habitat here at the college for a couple of years now, 5 years?
Yes.
In addition to the more charismatic wildlife, we should consider the less obvious biodiversity that underpins the food web that supports these organisms. We need trees, insects, rodents, and birds, if we are to have bobcats and foxes in our town. Wooded parcels sustain these entire food webs at our local scale. At our local scale. Take that home. That's key. Yeah, we all understand the importance of honeybees, but everything else is no less important. Our amphibians, for example, they come down from upland habitats where they overwinter down to pools, vernal pools especially, but other small water bodies, ideally fishless water bodies, and it is here they lay their eggs. But they get killed by the gazillions on our roads. Well, this is an exciting project that was sponsored, I think, in part by everybody here. The Lewis Creek Association took a lead role in fundraising for this. Moncton Conservation Commission, several amphibian leaders, state officials from Vermont Agency of Transportation, keeping track. We all participated in the Moncton tunnels. We built 2 of these. And today, the critters that try to cross that road, they don't get killed in the same numbers that they used to. By the way, that's a wooden salamander that some anonymous soul lovingly carved and put there to commemorate our success. And here is a spotted salamander in the tunnel. These guys are just incredible. It's the leopard frog, wood frog, toad. They're all important. And they're all, I have to say this, I don't know that they're all declining, but I worry because I see, for example, toads in my area declining. I don't see anywhere near as many as I used to, and it bothers me. Milk snakes, snapping turtles. This animal can live to be 50 years old. Can weigh 30, 35 pounds. Huge turtle. In contrast, this is a tiny turtle. This is the smallest hatchling turtle in the world, and it lives right here with us in Vermont. This is the musk turtle, otherwise known as stinkpot. You don't want to get killed on a road. You don't want to die young if you're a turtle full of eggs, because not only have you been killed, but your offspring have been killed. And over time, if you don't live to be old enough to have many eggs, your species suffers. So as we wind the show up, more charismatic critters, our bears, are wild, and they really are ambassadors of wild wherever we are in our region, except for downtown Burlington. They're everywhere. All they need is their privacy and food, good cover, good denning habitat for winter where they're not harassed. We found this in Colchester Pond. TV will soon turn off by idle. TV power off, press a button to keep it on, it says. Does everybody see what I'm talking about? I don't know.
I'll press the button.
Oh, what happened?
There you
Oh, thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick.
These are St. Mike's students looking at bear sign on trees, where the bears rub the trees and their hair rubs off. Here's a young student looking at the same hair, but it's fresher. It's not bleached by the sun. This is exciting stuff for people. So if I say nothing else today, get the kids, get the grandkids, and get out there and look around and enjoy the wildness of our region and help us with this. It's critical. We need to feel inspired, and so I like to look at our successes too and not just dwell on the heartache. I think our successes with bald eagle, for example, are stunning, and I'm proud of that. So we need to do that. We need to immerse ourselves in these good stories and know that we can make a difference. The Florida panther, for example, I spent several years down there working with colleagues who were in charge of Florida panther conservation initiatives, and now it's like a dream come true. In just 2021, with bipartisan support, 18 million acres of Florida will be dedicated to protecting a dispersal route for Florida panthers so that they can move to Georgia if they want. That's so exciting. So don't give up. Please, don't give up. This is an American chestnut that I planted. It was the size of a pencil. Look at the bees on there. There's at least 3 that you can see. I did a series of transects across lines of horizontal space across the width of that tree, drip edge to drip edge. And there were well over 300 flower sets like this that I could see. And there was an average of 3 to 5 insects associated with those flowers. You do the math. This tree was abuzz with insects. Incredible. These are the flower sets that are now going to mature into fruit. And here you want to support the American Chestnut Foundation, for example, that's increasingly growing more and more seedlings so that citizens like ourselves and groups, church groups, college groups, whatever, can plant these trees and get them back on the American landscape. So as we conclude the show, it's sobering, but it's an inspiration in its way. The living world is in desperate condition. It is suffering steep declines in all levels of its biodiversity, its diversity. Only a major shift in moral reasoning with greater commitment to the rest of life can meet this greatest challenge of the century. Wildlands are our birthplace. Large and small alike, the wild in our world is part of who we are. We've recently learned all kinds of things about trees, for example, that we didn't really know just in recent decades, and what we call mushrooms or fruit bodies of fungi that underground are linked up with trees. Whole forests are interconnected, communicating, and profoundly sharing. We didn't know that. Of course, animals, we know animals love mushrooms. We love mushrooms, but what about underground? What's going on under there? Well, Susan Simard is just one of a couple of fine scientists that have really been thinking about this subject, but I really love her book, Finding the Mother Tree. You really should check that out if you haven't read it. So I'll end with some quotes from her book. We have the power to shift course. It's our disconnectedness and lost understanding about the amazing capacities of nature that's driving a lot of our despair. And plants in particular are objects of our abuse. By understanding their sentient qualities, our empathy and love for trees, plants, and forests will naturally deepen and find innovative solutions. Turning to the intelligence of nature itself is the key. It's up to each and every one of us. Connect with plants you can call your own. If you're in a city, set a pot on your balcony. If you have a yard, start a garden or join a community plot. Here's a sample and profound action you can take right now. Go find a tree, your tree. Imagine linking into her network, connecting to other trees nearby. Open your senses. Thank you.
Well, thank you indeed. Thank you very much. The Q&A has been active, so I've got lots and lots of questions that I would like to ask. So here we go. Let's see. An anonymous person asked, are there catamounts in Vermont?
Oh, God. You know, I am prepared to say that catamounts, pumas, our preferred popular name, have passed through our region. We know that. They've passed through other regions. There was a cougar that went all the way from South Dakota to Humphreys County, Tennessee. Female cougar, which is really unusual. And then, of course, the tom that came across from North Dakota all the way to Ontario, and then down from Ontario somehow to the Lake George region, and then pulled a disappearing act and wound up in Connecticut where it was killed. So I'm not prepared to say that there aren't many more of these dispersers passing through. What worries me, though, is that we don't appear to have anywhere a resident population of females in place. And that would be what would stimulate a transient tom to set up housekeeping and stay in one area. So that does bother me, and so my official answer to that is I'm not going to say that people who claim they saw a cougar, catamount yesterday didn't. I wouldn't be so arrogant, because I remember when nobody saw a moose at all in this whole county where we all live. Nobody saw a moose. And then all of a sudden on Thursday, moose were confirmed where they hadn't been on Wednesday. Do you see where I'm going? So I keep an open mind about these things because animals are resourceful, and cougars have steadily expanded their range in the western states into now Midwestern states and so on. So keep an open mind, but I think in the meantime what we need to do is we citizens of this great country of ours need to encourage our Fish and Wildlife Service to develop an eastern cougar recovery plan. And that would be what would motivate us to commit to certain changes in how we do business with cougars that could certainly help them. Not the least of which is prohibiting hunting them the way we are now. The way we are hunting them in the West is totally unsustainable, and the best cougar biologists will tell you that. And when we kill the resident toms, for example, in a given area, his progeny by the females that share the home range with him will be killed by the incoming new toms. It's called infanticide. So that's what's caused the African lion to decline 70%, in the last X many years, from 450,000 animals to now maybe 20,000. We're not managing African lions by hunting them. So I'm not opposed to hunting. I'm a deer hunter myself, but I think we should not be hunting cougars, and we should be allowing dispersing cougars to move around and take up residence wherever they please, within reason.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
So Ruth Beecher from Starksboro, Vermont, participated in your Wilderness for Women program many years ago. And her question is, what sparked your interest in following your amazing career?
Wildness. There you go. Wildness. Not just wilderness, although wilderness is the pinnacle, but wildness. Yeah.
Excellent. Catherine Abbott asked, what are the most important things we can do to protect Vermont wildlife and insects?
Well, in the bibliography that I'm going to send you, there are the names of organizations, of course, in addition to the organizations that are making tonight's program possible. Very important organizations, certainly for this region, but statewide, or region-wide, there are other programs that we should pay attention to. And I think the wildlands, woodlands, farmlands, community initiatives that I mentioned earlier, you want to Google that and keep on top of when their publication is coming out. And that's going to be very important to support them in any way we can, because that's, to me, as I see it, that's a key vision. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
really.
Another interesting question, and I have a comment as it comes out here. The question was, what should we be considering when we locate trails to respect wildlife? And I just thought I would comment that on a college campus, when we added trails, it improves the value of the habitat in terms of how the college would be willing to protect it. The college is interested in it because it's a resource with trails for students. But we have to balance that against respect for wildlife, and I wonder what your thoughts are on locating trails to respect wildlife. And that's from Callie Bryn.
Yeah, that is such an important question, and I struggle with it because we have a major project, one town south of me in Richmond, where the mountain biking community wants to have a number of trails, which some of us feel should not exist in the upper portion of the town forest with wildlife in mind. In other words, I think following E.O. Wilson's idea, half earth, I certainly think every town forest should at a minimum strive to have a half earth policy with regards to recreation, because there are too many of us. And we want to have fun, and I'm among them, you know, biking, birding. We're all out there, but guess what? The human population has not stopped growing, really, and we're just really all wanting to be outside, and I applaud that. And but I also think we need to sharply define where we don't go, where we will leave nature to herself, and where animals will have their privacy, and we call it distance effects, hundreds of feet from the edge of a trail back into the woods. These animals feel our presence, and yeah, you might say they get used to our presence if it's really a lot. You know, something like the long trail, animals have been getting used to that for decades, not a problem. But we now know that it's too much. We're everywhere. We don't have big, vast wildernesses left in Vermont. So we need to understand where do we agree to be and not. I think of the snowmobiling. I remember when snowmobiling didn't regulate itself in any way. And many of us were concerned because, you know, it was too much. Well, they've done such a great job, the Vermont Association of Snow Travelers. I would hope the same thing could happen with the mountain biking community, that they would create a structure that would really bring science to the table, understand where things are okay, and understand where they're not going to be, because for the right reasons.
Yeah. Well, I could certainly agree with that. We have seen trails appear in places without any form of regulation, including on our own campus, and we've had to work with those people in containing their zeal. Becky Ebel asked, how would you recommend getting started with wildlife photography in ways that respect the animals?
Well, I think the most successful I can ever hope to be taking pictures is to sit still, and I take a stool, a folding little camo stool, into the woods, and I sit. And most of the time I freeze to death, and then when my bladder gets really full, I quit and go home. And I don't take any pictures. So I don't want to get anybody any illusions that it's always successful out there. But sitting still is very productive. And if you're in the right place, it's amazing what you can see. Excellent. And then sometimes listening. If animals are sounding alarm calls, and you're aware that that was happening before you even got there, there might be something else going on that you might want to be on the lookout for. And that's amazing to see.
Marilyn from Lincoln, I'm guessing Nebraska. Could you please share your insights on the impact of low-flying aircraft and drones on wildlife?
Yeah, I don't have any insights on the subject of drones, and I know that more recently even my great idol David Attenborough and his BBC crews and so on have used drones to get some of the remarkable pictures they have of wildlife on the Serengeti or on the Arctic or whatever. As far as planes are concerned, that's a different story, and there is quite, I think, an abundance of literature on the impacts of planes and helicopters on wildlife. And we can measure their stress, you know, the cortisone and all that. So we know that animals are stressed by these things if they're not used to it from day one. I'm sure the animals that live near the Ethan Allen artillery range get used to all that stuff happening. But for wild animals and wild habitats, it is very stressful. I know there's no question about it.
Anne Sullivan asks, and I will answer, is this being recorded so I can send it out to others? Absolutely. This will be on the St. Michael's College YouTube channel as soon as we can edit it and get it up there. We will do so. Anjanette De Carlo asks, what are your thoughts on the preemptive ash tree cutting due to the emerald ash borer that is coming, and what can we do to help the ash trees?
Well, I'm not qualified to say what we can do to help ash trees. I don't believe in systemic pesticides or any of that. I know there's some people tempted to try that. I'm really opposed to that, and but I'm also equally opposed to the idea of just preemptively cutting them down because they're going to die anyway. I often say we might as well take the chainsaw to our shins because we're going to die anyway. We know now, and thanks to the American Chestnut Foundation, that we shouldn't have cut down all the chestnuts the way we did for cordwood, for God's sakes. And now when we find old chestnuts that are still alive out there, I think we should be ashamed of ourselves. Now, this is a true story. I was invited to give a major biodiversity address at the oak openings in Ohio a number of years ago, and I was thrilled to go there because it's incredibly rich. Birders know about the oak openings because of the amazing mosaic of wetland and dry habitat. It's just you wouldn't think of it, but check it out. I was in the forest of the oak openings with their head botanist, and she showed me a stand of ash that were alive and well. And yet everywhere else we went, all around that forest, the ash were like skeletons standing in the sky, falling silver, dead, dead, dead. And I asked her, I said, what's going on? She said, well, you tell me. I think these trees are resistant. Now, here's what you need to know. Emerald ash borer started there. A guy that was working in Toledo or wherever was bringing home pallets to his rural home in the oak openings. And the pallets were from China. And that's how the emerald ash borer got into this country. They think. That's what she told me. I don't know. The lesson there is we can't just be cutting these trees down because they're going to die anyway, because we could be cutting resistant trees down. Period. We know this with chestnut. Dave Houston, a well-known Forest Service scientist who took my course a number of years ago, I showed him some clean beeches in my woods, and I told him that I believed that they were resistant. We went up to the one tree, and we both cried because it was clean as a whistle. And yet all around, all the other trees were just dead and dying. So who knows? So I don't approve of cutting them down. I know there's a lot of temptation out there. Liquidate your forest resource while it's still alive and economical to extract and all that. But if you can afford not to, don't. As far as the dead trees are on the ground and standing, their habitat, leave them. That's my personal feeling.
Excellent. And I can tell you that we are expecting to lose 88 trees on campus because over the years we've planted many, many ash. And my only suggestion is plant for diversity.
Yes.
We're replacing a row of 8 ash trees right now, and we're replacing them with 8 trees interplanted in between while the trees are still alive. And we have planted 8 different species in that row. So, our next question is, how do we get people as excited about essential insects and amphibians as they are about the signature mammals like the black bear and the bobcat?
Well, to me, there's no substitute for just getting to know them. Now, this is what I love about Jim Andrews and his program, and Green Mountain Audubon and their programs, and Bob Spear, the former Bob Spear, and his programs. Get out and know them. I'm so excited about birds now. I took up birding fairly late in life. I've been interested in everything else. I can't get over it. I just can't help myself. So the more you get to know these animals, including the insects and so on, the more overjoyed you'll be in their presence. That's really all that's all I've got to say.
Excellent. Let's see. Marilyn pointed out that she's from Lincoln, Vermont, not Lincoln, Nebraska. I think maybe we should finish on that note. What do you think?
Sure.
All right. Well, I
Yeah.
wanted to thank you once more, and perhaps we can get a louder round of applause from our small indoor audience here.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for participating. Glad that you could come, and we will indeed be getting this recording online on the St. Michael's College YouTube channel, and we look forward to getting that out there. And thank you once again to Susan Morse from Keeping Track Vermont and everybody who made this possible.
Thank you, Declan. Thank you, and your wonderful staff too.
Thank you, Patrick.
Yes.